Hello and welcome to the Maryland Davies College of Business Thought Leadership Series. My name is James Martinez. I'm the interim director for graduate programs here at the University of Houston downtown in the Maryland Davies College of Business. Joining us today for the Thought Leadership Series is Ms. Cari Hawthorne. Cari Hawthorne is the managing HR director for Ford Motor Company. And Cari has held a number of roles within companies such as Ford Motor Company as well as Microsoft. So she brings a great deal of experience for human resource professionals. Cari is also an alumni of the Maryland Davies College of Business MBA program, so we're very happy to have her joining us today. Also joining us today is the interim dean of the Maryland Davies College of Business, Mr. Kevin Jones. Dr. Jones, take it away.
Hey, so I'm here and happy to be here with Miss Cari Hawthorne. She's a UHD alum, MDCOB alum, both at the BBA and MBA level. Right now, you're a managing HR director at Ford, and you're specializing in the software side of that, software division. Before we get started with the questions that we have today, talking about professional development, please give us a brief overview of you and an introduction about why you joined UHD and yeah.
Thanks, Dean, for having me. And I'm always super glad to be back at UHD and share the experiences that I've had in my career. So as you rightly mentioned, today I am a managing HR director at Ford Motor Company over the Connected Vehicle Software Organization. Prior to that, I spent 4 years at Microsoft in the software space, then also HPE in the software space, spent almost a decade in the military, and somewhere in between there, I found my way to UHD. Part of the reason why I felt like UHD was the choice for me was primarily because of the flexibility. I was one of those students who didn't have the traditional college experience, staying in the dorm, stomping the yard, other than what I had saw in movies. And so this allowed me to still have that experience in the workforce, but also obtain the degrees that I needed to sustain myself in the workforce as well.
Okay, thank you. So kind of building on what you just mentioned, so the UHC provided you flexibility, and that's why you chose our university, specifically the College of Business. What were some of the key takeaways from your time here that helped develop your career trajectory?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things was balance, right? When you are a full-time employee and a full-time student, you have to figure out how to balance the needs and the requirements of both. You also, you have family, you have other obligations outside of those two things. It's one, figuring out the balance, but also two, I think at the time being here, being on campus, it was tapping into networks. One of the great things that I felt about this program when I did the MBA program is that the cohort you started with was the cohort that you finished with. So there were classes where I might have been stronger in, and then there were those finance courses where I leaned on someone in my cohort to help me along the way. And it's very similar to how things work in the workplace, right? You're not going to have the expertise in everything, but playing to your strengths and knowing when to tap into other people to play to their strengths as well was super important, and something that I learned from being here.
Okay, so it sounds like one of the main takeaways that you're describing is a need to reach out and connect with your fellow classmates.
Yeah.
Whether you're in an online environment or in person, right? You need to find a way to connect and figure out how to best utilize your strengths and your classmates' strengths to navigate through the academic career.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks always talk about, it's not what you know, but who you know, but then we don't spend the time getting to know folks.
That's right.
And so, it's if that is the belief, then we do have to spend the time, whether we are in a virtual class or we are in person. You have to spend the time tapping into those networks to get the resources that you need and leverage the people that you can leverage, and also be a resource to other folks as well. So.
Yeah, that's important too. So even as an entering student, an incoming freshman, at some point you need to start thinking about not only the things that you need to do professionally to develop your own career, but looking forward in the future, how you're going to give back to those who have helped you along the way. So I know that we haven't discussed this, but I'm just now really curious about what are some of your thoughts about how to develop that or instill that from a faculty standpoint, or for someone like you as an alumni? What would you do? How would we as a college help develop those skill sets in our incoming freshmen?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and this is totally, off the top of my head, but I think one of the things that take place in the workplace a lot is like, personality is not the right word for them, but they are like assessments. So like the DISC, different types of assessments that identify what are people's strengths, what are their weaknesses, what are the opportunities that they have. I think once folks are more familiar and able to identify those things, then they can also identify what they have to offer, right? And they can also identify the places where they might need to reach out and get additional help. I remember when I was coming through, this program, like I mentioned, I had a knack for problem solving. So if we were in a course and we were talking about like, how we might think through something, that was something that I was very good at. But when you put me in that accounting class, or you said, can you tell me what should be on this P&L? I was looking to the left and to the right of me, of my peers that I knew were actually doing well in those places. But I think to answer your question more concretely on how do you instill that, I think it's one, having students become familiar with the places that they are strong and the places that they are not so strong, and not looking at those places where they're not as strong as necessarily weaknesses, but like more as opportunities for them to develop and opportunities for them to tap into the strengths of others.
Yep. So being resourceful and understanding thyself, right? Knowing what you know, knowing what you don't know, and reaching out to others to help overcome those blind spots.
Yes. And I know we're going to get to the resourcefulness at some point in this discussion, but I can't emphasize that enough, like to be resourceful and know when to reach out, understanding that you may not always have a perfect setup where people are going to tell you every single thing, but being resourceful enough to know where to go and find the answers and who to tap into to get those answers is going to be super key.
Okay. So yeah, we can kind of touch on that now. So in your experience, what were some of the valuable skills that helped you along the way in terms of not only just navigating your professional life while you were working here as a student, but obviously in the classroom as well? What were some of the big skills that you needed?
Yeah. So if I were to, they always say hindsight is 20/20. If I were to think back about some of the things that I feel are still helping me today, I would say there's this book I read. It's called The Coaching Habit. And in The Coaching Habit, it talks about us being curious a little bit longer, right? Sometimes, even as new grads, as new employees, we go into environments and we want everyone to know that we know what we know, or we know all of the things. And it's great, right? That's why folks hired you. That's why you're, in the position that you're in. But we have an opportunity to be curious a little bit longer, to understand why is a company operating the way it's operating? What value could I actually bring? What more do I need to learn? So I would probably say the first thing is just curiosity, and extending that curiosity a little bit longer. The second thing I would say is resilience. I know that social media tells us a lot about how the workplace should be, and you should have the perfect manager, and they should pay you 1,700 figures, I know what it says, right? But the reality is that, if you walk into environments with those expectations, you will always be, let down, because the conditions will not always be perfect. And so you have to figure out, how do you still pick up the resilience and, navigate through the situation that you're in. When I was in the military, we used to sing this cadence that would say, don't let your dog tags dangle in the dirt. Pick up your motivation and put it in your shirt. And when I like transitioned out of the military, my kind of thought process was pick up your discipline, pick up your resilience, and put it in your shirt, because you're going to have to carry that with you in places where the conditions may not necessarily be perfect. And you can choose to either be resilient, or you can choose to like resign yourself to the conditions. So long-winded answer to say curiosity and resilience are those things.
Those are both really important. I think to some degree, all of us struggle with those from one time to another, especially when things start to get tough, right? Like we have a plan for our lives and something gets in the way, right? And we're at an inflection point or a crossroads, and we have to make a decision on what we're going to do. How do you have any insight on how we can try to improve in those areas?
Yeah, I think one, we're human, so we have to give ourselves grace for being human. To tell you that I never lose patience, or I always carry my resilience every single time, that would not be true, right? I think it's a constant reminder to me, though, that some things are not within our control, right? And so what I'd say is that when those moments come, I'd encourage folks to take a step back and pause and say, what is actually within my control? We use this language in the workplace around the circle of control. What is in that circle of control? If it's within the circle of control and I have some impact on it, then I can probably change the conditions. If it's outside of that circle, I cannot change the conditions. So then you have to ask yourself, am I going to, and I'm gonna plug another book here. My favorite book is Deep Work by Cal Newport. And he talks about how we all have very limited energy reserves. And so like when something happens that's outside of that circle of control and I can't move it, I ask myself, am I gonna spend my limited amount of reserves on this thing that I cannot move the needle on? Or am I going to reserve that because I know there's a bunch of other things that I can't actually influence and impact? So I just say, to answer that question more directly is that, in conditioning ourselves is like to just take a pause, take a beat. Is it in the circle? Is it out the circle? If it's out, like, don't waste the reserves. If it's in, then figure out, like, what's the alternative path? So.
Yeah. And that translates directly to just being a student, right? Like you have to figure out where to prioritize your efforts, especially as a full-time employee. If you're also taking classes full-time, like there are going to be certain things that you can't do, and you have to prioritize.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you kind of touched on another topic too related to that, critical thinking.
Yeah.
I know as a manager, you've faced this probably at some point as a hiring manager, where you have someone who has a question, and the easy route is to just ask you.
Yeah.
Right? How do you get people over that hump to actually try to think about what they could do on their own to solve that problem?
Yeah. I think that I think in some cases, folks may not necessarily feel that it's a bad thing and to go and ask your manager, to go and ask your professor. And in most cases, those folks in those roles, self-included, would be like, hey, come ask me, include me, let me know how I can help. Door is always open, all of the things, right? But I also think as a people leader myself, one of the ways that I try to like redirect a little bit is by asking the person, tell me what your thoughts are about this, tell me, what you think we should do, and tell me why you think we should do that. One, as people leaders and even as professors, I think over time, people will become conditioned to say, I know Cari's going to ask me this, so let me think through it, or I know, Dean Jones is going to ask me this, so let me think through it. And hopefully that helps to build the muscle of thinking through a thing before we go and try to ask for the easy answer. I think we're going to get to this at some point, but I'd also say this sort of flows into like the introduction of AI. Right now, we have these supercomputers at our fingertips. Like anything you can imagine and think of, you can ask the question. But you will not get the right output if you are not asking the right questions, if you are not putting the right input into those supercomputers. And so I just encourage people to, before you go and ask the question, imagine that Cari's going to ask you, tell me what you think about this, or tell me, like why you thought this thing, and bring that insight into the conversation before you just go and look for the easy answer.
Yeah, so that kind of goes back to what you said before about being curious, right? Because at some point, someone's going to ask you to be curious, right? Because absolutely. Especially once you graduate, you're out there in the real world, people are going to want to know that you've spent some time, that you've spent some of your own energy and effort to resolve the question that you have, rather than just running to the next person who might be able to solve it for you.
Absolutely. And beyond the critical thinking part, it's also a bit of problem solving. These are some of like the intangible things that you may not necessarily see on a job description, or you may not necessarily hear people ask for, per se in an interview, but like these are the skills that sort of like separate folks from the pack, right? I always tell people, and especially as folks are trying to like grow their careers and they're trying to get to, new levels and earn more money and things like that, there has to be something that delineates you from everyone else. Like, are you the person that is going to think through a thing before you ask? Are you the person that's going to come with a recommendation before you expect someone to give it to you? Are you a person that's going to try several things, try and fail? Are you a person that's going to be curious, that's going to be resilient? All of those things that you may not necessarily get asked directly in an interview, that people are like scanning for, because those are the things that are either going to make you successful in a role, or they're going to make your manager's job a little bit harder.
So you mentioned AI, and just basically technological change in the macro economy. What skills do you think are going to be rising to the forefront as it relates to these changes in industry trends?
Yeah, I think as it relates to like the individual, before I answer this question, I will say this. I don't want to minimize the impact that the introduction of AI has had on the world. I sort of liken it to, over hundreds of years ago when the automobile was first introduced. People couldn't fathom it. Now, living in a place like Houston, you could not imagine being without one, right? And so, like, as, technology and advancements in the world evolve, like people also evolve to their use of them. Like they become sort of integrated into the way we do life, the way we live life. When it comes to AI, I do think that we are still on this trajectory of like where it's going to take us. I think when it comes to the skills and what people need, I would say probably the most like core and fundamental skills for AI is prompting. Prompt engineering is what they call it. What I feel is that we're not necessarily asking the right questions. And so sort of similar to what I said before, if you're not putting the right things in, you're not going to get the right output. If you're using, the AI tools in the same way that you would have used a Google search bar, you're not getting the right output, from it, or the max output from it. And so I'd say it goes back to the critical thinking, right? Like, what are we actually asking? What are we trying to get to? What is the outcome that we want? And how are we reframing and reshaping our questions to make sure that we get that output from those tools?
So not only the prompt engineering specifically, but just broadly speaking, the ability to effectively ask a question to get an answer that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then understanding that the answer tracks to the question that you asked in the beginning. Like that's vitally important. Yeah. Especially in a career like yours with previously you were in Microsoft, now you're with Ford. Those type of things are vitally important in your career path. And can you give just an example of like perhaps when you've been in a situation where you've either had a coworker or an employee kind of missed the mark on that, and what the outcome or the ramifications of that were?
Yeah. I think for me, I can name countless. How much time do we have? And I think for me, as a leader, I try my very best to lead with empathy, and also like meeting people where they are. And so I recognize that, like we are still in a place where we're not asking the right questions. And I'll even take it a little step further, and I'll tell you a little personal story. About 2.5 years ago now, I decided that I wanted to sign up for an ICF coaching course. And the course was over, I think, like 4 or 5 months. And it was heavily focused on asking questions. And you would have to ask these questions live in the class to people. And the questions had to be questions that solicited responses and kept the conversations going. And not in a way that was like, and what now, and what now, and what now? Like actual questions to pull out information from these folks. By the second month, I was like, how is it that this is my job and I feel like I am not great at this? And I quit the program. I was not good at asking questions. And then I rejoined the program a year later, and I got better at asking questions. And now I feel even more comfortable asking the questions. So I bring up this example because I recognize that for the folks that report to me, sometimes my peers, sometimes students in the classroom, people that we interact with, like folks are still kind of on this curve of learning how to ask better questions. And as a leader, and also as, a coach to the folks that report to me, when I recognize that they might be struggling with asking the right questions, it's a challenge for me to ask different questions to them, to parse that out and help them get to the outcomes that they're trying to get to.
Okay. Yeah. So we spent a little bit of time on AI, and we've also spent some time on interpersonal skills like perhaps teamwork.
Yeah.
We've talked quite a bit about critical thinking. What are some other soft skills, maybe power skills is another term I've heard, things that aren't quantitative in nature that are fundamentally important in terms of getting a job, being successful in that career, and then how can you translate or convey that you're actually proficient in these skills to an employer?
Yeah, this question might actually take us through the rest of our time together. Just kidding. I think there's a couple of things. So please redirect me if I go too long. I think the first thing, and I can speak to this because this is a thing that I am still actively working on today. The first thing is like confidence, right? Building the confidence muscle. And I will say very transparently, it is uncomfortable. It is very uncomfortable. I sort of liken it to the gym. Like when you first start going to the gym and you're working out and you're trying to build a muscle, it's going to be painful. It's going to be like, you're going to be sore. You're going to be saying to yourself, I am not coming back to this gym tomorrow. But the only way you see the results of building that muscle is to go back again. And maybe you don't use the same weights. Maybe you try a different machine or a different angle to work the same muscle, but you continue to work the muscle until you build it strong enough. Confidence is one of those things. I can't tell you how many times I've said no to a thing. I've stopped a thing because I wasn't confident. And I have to constantly remind myself and remind other folks that, one, you just gotta build the reps. You gotta go in and you gotta give it another rep. That's the only way you're gonna get better at it. Two, there's a lot of other people like in the world that are a lot less skilled, a lot less, knowledgeable about a thing, and those folks just be yapping. Like they are not like feeling like they are not confident or anything. They could not even be saying the right thing, and they will yap you. And so I'm like, why can I yap too? Like we should be confidently yapping. So I would say confidence is probably one of the things that folks have got to build. If you're not good at a thing, if you're feeling like you are not as knowledgeable about a thing, then what do you need to do to build that knowledge, to build that skill so that you feel more confident in that? I'll tell you another example related to myself in work. I typically, you all might not believe it, but I typically am very, very quiet at work. I normally will absolutely not speak unless I have something to say. And the feedback that I've constantly got is that, Cari, we don't hear your voice enough. Like, we need to hear your voice more. And there was this little voice inside of me that was like, surely what I have to say is so basic. Like, it's not going to add anything to the conversation. Like, it's not worth saying. Until I started saying it. And folks were like, oh, actually, I hadn't thought about that. Or, oh, actually, we could do that. And it's scary at first. My voice was shaking, believe it or not. I was shaking. But you give it the reps, and over time, you continue to get better. You shake a little less. Your voice is a little less shaky. But you continue to go at it. So long story short, confidence is the first one. The second one I would say is that folks have got to build up the skill of storytelling and telling, especially for students who are going into the workforce, people who are transitioning careers. No one can tell the story, your story, better than you. I always say to folks, what people have to decode, they end up discounting. So if I can't make out what experiences you have, if I can't understand what you've done, then people tend to diminish the experience or discount the experience. And whose fault is that? Is it the person who didn't have all the context, or the person who didn't tell the right story? And so I would say students have got to get better at storytelling. Folks in general got to get better at confidence. I'd also say that one thing I'm still working on myself is imposter syndrome and feeling like we don't belong in places. We have to work on that. If you're one of those folks that you already got the job, and similar to myself, like, oh, I shouldn't speak up, like, we hired you to hear you. We hired you to leverage your expertise. We didn't hire you to sit in the back and to cower, to sit in the back and not add anything. And so imposter syndrome is another one. I already mentioned curiosity. Like, that one also has to be at the top of the list. And I would probably say 1.1 on the list is resilience. I cannot express that enough. I have seen so many cases where a person may not necessarily have all of the relevant experience, but they have the resilience and the right attitude to learn and to go and ask the right questions and go and be resourceful and figure it out. I just add this one last thing in that, a lot of times we expect people to take chances on us that we don't take on ourselves. And I want to encourage folks to give themselves every opportunity to win. I remember when I first decided that I was going to pivot into HR in the civilian sector, I came to UHD. I learned about the HR certifications. I got the HR certifications because my motto was that I don't want you to tell me no. I don't want to apply for this thing and you say, Cari, actually no, because you don't have this. That is actually in my circle of control. I can control that. So I'm going to go and get this thing. And if you tell me no about something else that's outside of my control, I could live with that. I cannot live with something that is within my sphere that I have an opportunity to impact and I don't go and do the thing. And so the meta point here is don't ask folks to take a chance on you that you're not taking on yourself. Go and do the things that you know that you need to do that are going to get you to the places where you want to go.
So a lot of the things that you mentioned just in my own mind, the term or the phrase that popped to my mind was be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Like you have to be able to take those chances, step outside that comfort zone so that you can improve. And if the results aren't there right away, that's okay.
Yeah.
Right? Like you just have to decide what's important to you and how committed you are to seeing that thing through.
Absolutely.
So we've talked a lot about students and student success in terms of what they need to do to be successful in graduation. But what can we as faculty and administrators, staff members, what can we do to help students develop the skills that we've talked about to be successful? A lot of it so far has been focused on the individual doing things, but what can we do to help facilitate that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that UHD does really well, and I think one of the things that have made this program, the MBA program in particular, most attractive, is bringing in corporate fellows, one of which I am as well. These industry folks into the classroom to provide like the industry perspective, because sometimes there is a difference in what we learn in school and the application of that once we get out into like the workforce. So I think that's one thing that UHD already does very well. The other thing that I think professors could do, and I hope the students don't witch hunt me, but I think the LinkedIn profile is necessary. I do. I think that having a LinkedIn profile should be on the syllabus of every professor. I think that if you have to give credit for, I don't know what has to happen, but the amount of times I meet people that are in college and do not have the LinkedIn profile, but that talks to me about wanting to do this or do that, it is astounding. And so I think that to better prepare, and I also think like centering some assignments around creating the muscle of comfortability of students reaching out to people on LinkedIn. It's not going away. It is the way that folks find jobs. I hope no one's from my job looking at this, but just last week, 2 recruiters reached out to me about, some roles that they wanted to talk about. The role that I'm in today was not a role I applied for. It was someone reached out to me about a role and said, can we have a conversation? And so I think the faculty can absolutely assist in that, because I think it is a huge linchpin between like graduating and the next step.
Building that network.
Building the network.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, that's really helpful. So, I mean, we've just essentially we revised our BBA and MBA core programs very recently. They're kicking off in the fall semester. So that's something that certainly we as faculty can take a look at, because our students, I mean, just like anyone else, like we're all engaged in social media one way or another. May as well use the platform that actually helps us advance our career.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what do you, I mean, we've talked about several skills. Maybe some of them are easier to identify than others, but what are some skills that you've seen recently that you've had a hard time hiring, things that you need that are hard to come by, or at least hard to understand whether or not the applicant possesses those skills by just looking at their CV?
Yeah, I'd say one of the things is like introspection. I know that when we go to interviews, we, want to put our best foot forward, and we should, but we oftentimes speak to a lot of the things that we do well, and we don't identify the mistakes that we've made. And it's not, I'll tell you as an interviewer, it's not about the mistake, actually. It's about what you learned from the mistake, how you recovered from the mistake, the ownership and the accountability of the mistake. I remember when I was interviewing at my current company, I got asked this question, and the response I gave was about a time that I made a $2 million mistake. It's a pretty hefty mistake. And normally, folks might be like, I'm not telling that story. Like, I'm going to tell you because I made the mistake, but I also learned so much from that. And it also changed the way I thought about the work going forward. It didn't necessarily make me second guess myself, but it made me double check myself. It made me pause and not be overly confident in my delivery, but making sure that the quality of the things that I put out actually reflected, what I wanted it to reflect, wasn't a true representation of the work that I did. And so I'd say that, when I'm interviewing someone, I'm looking for I'm trying to parse for the humility. I'm trying to parse for the introspection. Like, are you a person who is reflective on things? Are you the critical thinker? Are you resilient? And sometimes it's not easy, sometimes it's not easy, but I think this also comes back to asking the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
So. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So one thing that I have been passionate about for several years now is trying to identify internship opportunities for our students and then getting students to actually take those internships. Mm-hmm. From your perspective, how important is that in terms of when you're looking through resumes and trying to filter out who might be the right fit? How important are internship opportunities?
Yeah, I haven't hired for this level in quite some time, but what I would say is this. There are times where people are experience deficient, and I know the students might hunt me down for this, but I'm going to just say it. Sometimes in order to gain specific experiences, again, the conditions may not always be what you want them to be. The internship might require you to move somewhere for a few months. The internship might require you to take less money than what you might be making at your current job. The internship might require things from you that you're like, wait, do I really want to do that? But one thing I always, tell folks is that once you get the experience, no one can take that thing away from you. And sometimes experience is the hardest thing to get for people. And so when those opportunities come up, even if the conditions are not perfect, I'd encourage you to be resilient and to really evaluate beyond the opportunity. That's the other thing. I know you didn't ask me this, but I'm going to just share that sometimes we're very short-sighted. Sometimes we think, oh my God, I don't want to move for 3 months. In today's time, 3 months is like 5 minutes. I swear it was just January, and I think we have to look past the immediate future and ask ourselves, what is this thing setting me up for? Is the conditions may not be ideal right now, but if it sets me up to secure this thing later on down the line, then the time would have been well spent, And so the internships, the experiences are super, super important, and where you can grab them and where people are willing to offer them, I'd encourage folks to take them.
So earlier you mentioned being able to effectively tell your story is important, but along those same lines, you have to have a compelling story to tell, and
Absolutely.
internships help you develop that story.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So what are you personally working on in terms of your own personal and professional development?
Yeah. So for me, it's a couple things. It's using my voice still. I think that is a continuous opportunity for me. It is being more confident. That is probably, I don't know what number is before 1, but that's the one. Being more confident. And then the third thing is the imposter syndrome. And you look for ways to, in my mind, I tell myself I look for ways to get the reps in. And what I mean by that is there are times where I'm in conversations where I typically wouldn't say something, and I see it as an opportunity to get a rep. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to just say it. We'll see what happens. If y'all don't see me at this job tomorrow, y'all know why. We're just going to get the rep in and see what happens. And when you get the rep in and it goes well, like the confidence builds. When you get the rep in and it doesn't go so well, like you learn from that, right? And then you go back in the next day and you try a different angle to get a rep in, you know? And so for me, those are the three things: using my voice, being more confident, and the imposter syndrome piece, like not shrinking in the rooms, not speaking up because I feel like I may or may not belong. I was reading something recently that said, people actually don't think about us as much as we think they do. A lot of times it is us who are in our own heads, and we're wondering, like, is someone looking at my forehead, or, are they like, what are they thinking about me? And I'm not thinking about you at all, And so I think that, we have to get out of our own way and get the reps in.
Yeah, so our students, by and large, I've been here since 2011, and our students are determined. They have fought through a lot of things to get where they are.
Yeah.
But like all of us, they struggle with confidence issues or imposter syndrome, right? Like it's something that everyone shares to some degree or another. But I think my add-on to what you've said is that our students aren't alone, right?
Yeah.
Like there is a support system. Alumni, faculty, staff, administrators, we're all here to help. So it's not the case that students who are facing challenges, whether it's a bad grade, whether it's an issue on the job, like you don't have to feel like you're alone.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is that, these things are like, marathons. They're not necessarily like a destination. For as many of the great things that have happened in my life and that have happened in my career, the fact that I'm sitting here in 2026 still telling you that I am, still developing confidence and developing and learning and growing from imposter syndrome and still learning how to use my voice is indicative of, like, you never stop growing, you never stop evolving, you never stop learning. And just because you haven't gotten something right, like today or by the time you think you should have gotten it right, it doesn't mean you failed. It means that you're still learning. And also, sometimes the conditions, the environments will test you in different ways. In college, you might think like, yeah, I'm confident, like I got it together. And then, you get to BP or Exxon down the street and you're like, wait a minute, actually, I don't think I'm that confident at all, And so you give yourself grace and you understand the environments will continue to grow you if you let them. Yeah.
Okay. So, questions?
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. We do have some questions. So the first one is, what advice would you give an HR professional stuck at a ceiling who are considering an MBA or a BBA? And how do you know if it's the right time to go back to school?
So I'll tell you how I knew that I was supposed to get the certifications. I started looking at jobs that I wanted. And so to this person, I'd say, like, for the jobs that you want to apply for, go and look at those jobs and see what the requirements are. And it goes back to the earlier point that I said, if the jobs require you to have the MBA or the BBA or specific certifications or things like that, then that is within your circle of control, right? The longer you delay that, the more you are just hoping someone takes a chance on you without those things. And that's a chance that you haven't actually taken on yourself. I also recognize that sometimes there are conditions that, impact people's ability to go back to school and things like that. But to answer the question more directly, I would just say review the job descriptions of the roles that you are interested in and see what those roles require, and then reverse engineer how you acquire those things so that you can minimize people telling you no.
Thank you. So the next question is, what trends are you seeing in hiring that MBA students should be aware of?
Trends I'm seeing in hiring that MBA students should be aware of. I'd say that there are a lot of rotation programs out there that MBA students should be plugged into and that they should be aware of as they come available. There are so many different ways you can set alerts for when rotation programs are posted. I love rotation programs or like college graduate programs that are separate from internships, because these programs are normally over the course of a couple of years. They'll rotate you through different like departments and different teams to round out experiences. And then if you do well in those roles, a lot of times companies have conversion rates where they say X percent of people who came in through this program, we want to convert them into full-time hires. And so if I had to give a piece of tangible advice around trends, I'd say a lot of people minimize or maybe don't know about rotation programs available to MBA students. And I would encourage you all to get plugged into those, set up your alerts, get plugged into those things so that you are aware of them when they pop up.
I didn't know about those either. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing.
Of course.
So I have two questions about resilience. One of them is, how do you build resilience without becoming burned out?
Yeah. How do you build resilience without becoming burnt out? I think that we have to think about like prioritizing things, right? And I also want to just also acknowledge that sometimes there are points in our careers where we have to recognize like what our tolerance levels are, right? By no means do I ever want to insinuate if an environment is toxic, if you have a people leader that is like abusive or, you know, things like those are, that is, I don't want you to be resilient through that. All right. That's not what I'm saying. I think we have to understand our tolerance levels. I also think we have to understand where we prioritize our time. I'd also encourage you to pick up Deep Work by Cal Newport and learn about energy reserves, because then you'd kind of like assess what actually gets your energy, right? I sort of liken my own energy as like it's super like precious and rare. I'm not going to spend it in places that don't deserve it, right? And what I mean, to double click on that, is that like, because everything can't get my attention, everything can't bother me, right? And it minimizes me also feeling burnt out or feeling overly stressed because I'm not giving my time and attention to everything that asks for it. So
Thank you. So you kind of talked about, which answered our second question, which was, how do you know when to keep pushing through a challenge versus when it's time to change direction?
yeah, I think physically your body tells you. I think also, you know, again, folks have to just be really, really honest about like what is within the circle of control and what is outside of that circle. I'll give like a very sort of vague example because I can't share the specifics, but I want to just kind of zoom in on this question a little bit because I understand like where it's coming from. There was a time in my career where I had been in an environment that was like super, super established. All of the tools and resources and things that you could think of were at your fingertips. And I had gone to another place that was not the case. And it caused a little bit of frustration because it made getting things done twice as hard. It slowed down my productivity because I didn't have all of those tools and resources at my disposal that I had previously. But when I took a step back from like that situation, and I mentioned this earlier about pausing, you know, I'd also encourage folks to just like pause and take a step back. Like sometimes we're too close to a thing to be able to see the whole picture. What I realized is that other place didn't have all of the tools and the resources and the things, but there was something that I was still building in that environment that I was not building in the other one. There were some reps that I was getting in that environment that I was not getting in the other one. And so what I would say is that, like, you know, you have to assess and you have to like just step back and say, what am I actually getting from here? You know, and am I expecting the conditions to be perfect or be like what I like my perception of what they should be? And can I actually adjust, right? Sometimes we can, sometimes we cannot, and no one can tell you what that level of tolerance will be, right? We all have varying levels of tolerance, and something that I might be able to push through might be very different from someone else. So you have to assess what those things are. I know we need to move on to the other question, but this is what I will also just say as well. I want to make sure I drive this home, in that we have to be very mindful about how quickly we move on from things too, because the lesson that you don't learn in one place will repeat itself in another. And so like you have to ask yourself whether or not you are actually getting what you need from a place, or you're just saying, I just want to move on because I don't have to deal with this. And if you can do that, that's totally fine. A lot of people, that's not their story. So.
Thank you. So the next question is, if a student wants to work in HR for a tech-driven company, what should they be learning now? And some examples they gave were technical fluency, data skills, or something else.
Yeah, I think that the focus should be less on the actual industry and more on the actual experience. I never set out to do HR in a tech company. I didn't tell this story at the beginning, but actually I was working in nonprofit, and I ended up taking a pay cut to go and take a HR job at another nonprofit just to get the civilian sector experience, because my military experience was, I wasn't telling the right story about my military experience, one, so it wasn't translating, but two, like the way we did things in the military was slightly different from how things were done in the civilian sector. And I felt like I needed to go and get the experience in the civilian sector to tell a compelling story. That said, there was never a focus on the specific industry. As a matter of fact, I'll go a step further. At some point, I had applied for a role at Microsoft, and I remember the recruiter reaching out to me via email saying, hey, can you answer these questions about your experience? And I was like, actually, no, I'd rather talk on the phone. And then they never responded to me. And then I applied for another job, and a recruiter reached out, and they were like, hey, can you answer these questions? I was like, oh, maybe this is the process. And I finally answered the questions, and that's how we got through the whole thing. But I never set out to zoom in on a specific industry. So I'd say focus less on the industry and more on the experience, because I am specifically dedicated to the tech side, but there are HR folks that are aligned to finance, to supply chain, to go to market, to various different other functions. And so I wouldn't limit yourself just because of the industry.
Awesome. So next question we have is saying, we're hired to deliver and have answers. How do you admit when you don't have the answers or recognize a weakness without making others question whether you were the right person to hire?
Yeah. I think that's an amazing question. Who is that person? I should hire them. Just kidding. I think that one, I mentioned introspection earlier, right? No one has all of the answers. None of us. And oftentimes we end up looking a little overzealous when we pretend that we do. And so I think it is quite all right to say, hey, I looked into this thing. I'm really still not sure, but I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and I'll come back to you, right? Or if you get asked a question on the spot and you don't know, say, you know what? Great question. I'm not really sure. Let me come back to you. One of the things I encourage people to do is always have those drawer statements in those moments. And the way you land the drawer statement will have an impact on whether folks evaluate whether you were the right person or not, which brings me back to the confidence piece. Have those statements in your back pocket that you can leverage, in those moments where you're not sure of something, that doesn't cause people to question whether or not you were the right hire.
And I would add to just something that you'd mentioned earlier about curiosity, right? Like when you're faced with a challenge, a situation where you don't have the answer, what have you tried? What are you willing to try to solve that problem before you admit that, look, I've tried A, B, and C, and these things haven't worked. Do you have any insight on what I could do next?
Yep.
Like that's a completely different conversation
Yep.
than I'm lost, help me.
And a completely different question, which is like asking better questions.
Awesome. So we're going to finish up with this question. You did share a lot of great advice. However, if you could give one piece of advice to everyone watching you right now, what would that be?
I would probably say, just one. Just kidding. I would probably say, don't discount the reps. Like, get your reps in. Be curious a little bit longer. And pick up your resilience and put it in your shirt.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Cari, for your time. You've given us a lot of insight, a lot of takeaways for our students and us as faculty and staff as well. So I really appreciate your time. Really appreciate the questions that we received. They were excellent as well. That will conclude today's Thought Leadership series, and we'll see you next time.